unfortunately, people that come from disadvantaged backgrounds, it's easier for us to fall into those traps. We don't necessarily have the best guidance, and we have to kind of figure it out for ourselves. So probably prone to making more mistakes than we otherwise would have.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back, Championship Leadership Podcast. We got Joshua Hatter with us out of Charleston, South Carolina. Thanks for being here, Joshua.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. What comes to mind for you when you hear Championship Leadership? That's the name of the show. So always interested to hear.
I'm 41, so I probably go back to like 90s Bulls.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's so it's interesting too, actually. Right. I'm not a huge basketball guy. It's hard not to this time of year.
Right.
But seeing LeBron break a long-standing record, decades long. I mean, this is a guy that coming into the league had every high expectation and crushed all of them. That is, it would be hard. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody else that had such high expectations and just crushed all of them. So it's always interesting to have that debate. But I was born in '81, so I grew up with all those 6 championship Bulls teams. So
I mean, those are the days, right?
Oh, man. And watching the 72 and 10, and then watching that during COVID too, the Last Dance, right? It's just super cool. So that's awesome. That's probably what goes through my head.
Yeah. Like you said, I mean, LeBron was like, and there have been many of the next Air Jordans, right? And
that have done
not
nothing.
Too many. I mean, that's a big bill to fill, but
for sure,
LeBron, he definitely rose to the occasion and crushed all expectations, which is cool. So
absolutely.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of the path you've been on in life and how that takes you to where you are here today and what you're up to today?
Sure. Yeah, it's been a little crazy, man. My background's pretty shitty. I'm a super transparent guy, so you're welcome to go anywhere you want.
Love
man.
it.
I mean, I grew up in all kinds of abuse. My father died in prison. Typical kind of Goodwill Hunting sob story, if you will. Later in life, diagnosed with an attachment disorder and PTSD. So kind of went through that, stumbling into adulthood and just trying to figure it out. Wound up stumbling into corporate America, spent almost 20 years in sales in corporate America. Probably the luckiest thing that happened to me is there was an email that went out when I was about 21 years old in my first corporate job. I'm like a solid year into a job I kind of hated, was trying to finish my undergrad degree. And this email goes out asking for volunteers to work on a proposal, nights and weekends. And so I worked, this is back when you couldn't do a proposal virtually. You had to go in person around a conference room table, right? So like 2002 timeframe. So went in 2 nights a week and every single Saturday and Sunday for like 18 months. There was no pay. So just volunteering. But it was one of those things where at that young age, I was at least smart enough to see both the opportunity of the fact of like what we were doing in terms of competitive analysis and, writing compelling proposals, at least more along the lines of where I wanted to head in life. And the team, like the kind of lead guy, the vice president of business development at the time, was just like an amazing dude, and he had won so much. So that wound up resulting in a $179 million contract. I worked for defense contractors throughout that 20 years. So that was the biggest contract that office had won at the time. So smart enough to see the opportunity, lucky enough to be involved with that guy. Having grown up with a really crappy background, that guy wound up putting me in a lot of the right places and just kind of teaching me how to be an adult, frankly. And throughout my 20s, and getting me on the right boards and things like that. And he actually is now like kind of more of a dad figure to me. He was actually my best man at our wedding last year. So totally 180. Like now he's known me more than half my life. I call him dad. I've been taking him out for Father's Day brunch for probably the better half of the last 20 years. So it's been a journey, but I kind of fell into short-term rentals. I would consider myself a bit of a short-term rental guru. I started doing that in 2012.
Okay.
Started doing it full time in 2021, but we actually started buying boutique hotels a year ago.
Okay.
So kind of shifting from the Airbnb to the actual bed and breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of been fun as well too. But that's kind of the nitty gritty elevator speech. My tagline is I turned a $30,000 401k loan in 2012 to over $5 million 10 years later, just through playing real life Monopoly.
That's incredible. That's an impressive story for sure. So feels like a lot to unpack there too.
Mhm.
What is your dad still alive?
No.
No.
I consider myself super fortunate. So he died in 2010. The way I found out my father passed away was I used to, so the Federal Bureau of Prisons website, BOP.gov, I used to go on and kind of you can see the incarceration date and the release date, projected release date. And he had been in long enough that I could kind of see the women in my family starting to freak out a little bit. Like, crap, he might actually make it out of here. And, so checking closer to the potential release date. The way that I found out he passed was I logged into that website one night and it said deceased. So I called the prison and they're like, "Who are you?" Like, "Well, you're not listed as next of kin, so all we can say is that he's not in the facility anymore." So I had to call his mother, who was still alive, and she confirmed that he had passed. So yeah, and frankly, in hindsight, huge relief. Like I could there was a cloud that had been over the family for a long time that I think lifted after that. You can truly begin to unpack and process, all the things that we went through. And I look at lots of people now as an adult that still have that attachment to whatever the trauma was. And they still have to relive it in some form. And so I consider myself super grateful to have had the chance to process it for the last 13 years, as opposed to still dealing with it.
Well, yeah. So what attachment? What is that? Tell me.
Yeah. So attachment disorder. So it's basically when your parents aren't normal, so to speak. So when you have a normal baby, right there, they develop an attachment to their parent.
Okay.
It's kind of the you cry and the parent calms you, takes care of you. And so if you don't have that, then you just kind of grow up thinking that when something bad happens, no one's ever there, right? So you don't develop this closeness with a birth parent that you normally should. And so, for lots of reasons, there's just a lot of stuff going on as far as like domestic violence and stuff like that, dealing with, police calls to the house. So probably like a little deeper than you want to get, or I don't know. I'm happy to talk about whatever.
No, I mean, not at all. Not really. I mean, as long as you're okay with it.
I'm totally fine, man. Yeah. So it's just, it's all that all kind of comes with the territory. I spent the better part of 20 years kind of in and out of therapy, trying different folks, and that's really helped me a lot. It's been interesting. A lot of my siblings have kind of taken a alternate path. I'm watching my little sister go through this now as she's kind of really confronting some of this stuff. And it's really interesting to have had the hindsight, and the ability to look at the last 20 years with talk therapy. So it's been an interesting path.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm 46, I think I've come to figure out we've all had some shit in our life, and just to varying degrees, right?
We all have our cross to bear.
Yeah. And so, I don't know my dad, and he was never around and left early and just never a part of my life. And I've always discredited that, like that it didn't really make a big impact on me. But just the older I get, I'm like, how does it not? Right. Like, so I've been kind of going down some rabbit holes. I did some ayahuasca, and that opens the door to a whole different world as well. And so I'm just
that's super interesting.
Doing some work and trying to unpack things, and I don't know. It kind of feels like when you open a door, like you better be careful because you might open a bunch of other doors. And then I
don't. I mean, we don't know each other well. I'm happy to continue this conversation after this. But I think that obviously we both have our own thing, right? And I think you spend so long telling yourself that this doesn't matter, this didn't
Yeah.
impact me, right? And at some point, if you're honest with yourself and you look in the mirror, you realize it has impacted every decision you've
Yeah.
ever made, right?
Yeah.
And if you're really willing to look at that, I mean, it winds up being a super introspective and interesting
Yeah.
experience, but it also sucks, man. It's
Yeah.
ripping the Band-Aid
It's
off.
hard, right? Yeah.
It's going into old scar tissue for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, to kind of play off that is, yeah, I'm always interested to hear how that, I mean, because I think like you said, I think it absolutely does affect who you are and how you come out of it. And sometimes it can come out of it positively because of it, and sometimes maybe not so positively. But yeah, how do you see how that has really kind of made you who you are today? And like,
Yeah.
did you say you just got married a year ago?
I actually 5 months today. Yeah. So
Oh,
I'm a
5 months ago.
whopping 5 months into it for the first time. So that
First time.
frankly was part of it for me. It took me a
Sure.
while to actually get to the altar. So
Yeah. Yeah.
my wife deals with my shit. So, that's
Yeah.
a good thing.
How
Yeah.
did it serve you in business, or do you think it did or did not?
No, so, I think you survive in chaos, right? And so, I mean, even just physiologically, there's a lot of things, you're almost like burning things that you normally should feel in chaos, right? So
Yeah.
at some point, you just stop feeling them because you're so used to the chaos. And I mean, entrepreneurship is just constant chaos, right? It's ups and downs. I kind of liken it to, you got to be that if you watch NFL, I'm a huge NFL fan, right? So if you watch
Yeah.
NFL games, right, you see a field goal kicker miss a kick, and the coach is kind of, like it just, he looks
Yeah.
at a sheet, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's the fifth kick, and then it's kind of like, shit, that guy's getting cut on
Yeah.
Tuesday. So like it's kind of, you got to be that calm in the storm. And so in hindsight, I think it makes it pretty easy to do that.
Yeah.
I also don't try to solve problems that don't exist, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things. I don't try to anticipate something that's not an issue. I mean, you need to be wary of it, kind of recognize it. But the reality is, if you're constantly planning for the worst and then hope for the best, it's in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Reality
Right.
is somewhere in the middle. So, as far as entrepreneurship, I think being able to kind of take those highs and lows. My short-term rental management company has grown 100% year over year each of the last 4 years. So it's been, and we're set up on a similar path again this year. So, that's like constant chaos, right? It's constant organizational change. You're constantly growing the company, hiring employees, all those types of things. So it makes for kind of an interesting day in and day out, but you're able to keep a much more level head, I think, as you go through those ups and
Yeah.
downs. It's an impact you much.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that obviously you did have a positive male figure come into your life that you consider your father. And I think it's important that we all have those types of mentors or people that come into our life to help us along the way. Maybe talk a little bit more about the impact of that for you or others as well that potentially have come and really helped you to be where you are today or who you are today.
Totally. Yeah. It's that's been so I'm 41. I met him when I was 20, right? So literally more than half my life now.
Mhm.
And just incredibly fortunate. I mean, he kind of, saw, so first of all, I was the only person, they put that email out that I mentioned earlier to 100 people in the office, and I was the only one that volunteered to show up the
Yeah.
entire time, right? So I once worked for a business owner who said rule number one of success is to show up.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that mantra, right? Like nobody else even showed up. So it's pretty
right.
easy to differentiate yourself a bit. But beyond that, kind of growing beyond that, he actually left the company shortly after that and went to another company. And I was kind of hoping to take a job, and I missed him by like 3 months there.
Okay.
And so I was fortunate enough a couple years later, kind of just kept in touch. Was fortunate enough a couple years later to work directly for him, and I worked directly for him for like 5 years. And again, this is like a crazy story, but I like talking about it.
Yeah.
So I worked for him starting in 2006 directly to like 2011. Then I got kind of promoted to the same level. But during that time is when my father got federal charges. So, my family contacted the FBI. We're kind of helping out on this case, right? And so he knew enough to know that he didn't want to know, kind of like just whatever you got to do it. And so there would be times that I'd have a field agent call and I'd walk out of the office for 2-3 hours on the phone, and I'd come back in and at one point I kind of sat down in his office. I'm like, hey man, do you kind of know what's going, I feel like I owe you something at this point, and he's like, I know enough, right? He's like, do you feel like you need to talk about it? I'm like, oh man, I'm in therapy, like I'm good, dude. I'm just trying to get through the experience, And he's like, I don't need to know then, And so it was after that experience that we wound up talking about it. But like in hindsight, again, to your point, I mean, super fortunate that I happened to work for him directly at the time, to work for somebody that was so caring and compassionate and empathetic. As it kind of could have gone another way, right? I could have lost my job for something like that. So, wound up working out pretty well. And I would say once I got kind of promoted to the level that he was at, we worked for this Fortune 500 company. That was where our relationship changed a little bit. I didn't work directly for him every day. So kind of moved more into dad mode and, more just talking about life and kind of what we want out of life. And I think we kind of grew together. So he couldn't have kids. And so, just the relationship just started to be like more and more special over time. So, now there's not a time they actually go on these crazy ass vacations. So they're in Poland now for 2 months. My wife and I went over there for brunch on a Sunday, and we just sat there and played chess for a few hours. And, we both, like, every time we spend that amount of time together anymore, we're like, I just want you to know how much this means to me. Right. And so it's just interesting at this age, like having gone through so much and then to be able to have something like that. I'm super fortunate, right? It's most people that have that crappy of a background don't have somebody that they feel like has shown them what unconditional love is. And I feel like I was able to see that starting at age 20. So not zero, but hey, at least it started at 20 instead of, not at all.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That's inspiring, man. Love it. So 2012, I believe you say you get into real estate.
Yep.
And $30,000 out of your retirement account.
Yep.
And so, maybe talk about that journey and how that's kind of spiraled to what you do today, because I imagine you didn't have in mind what it would grow to or what it has become today when you were first maybe buying that first property. I'm in the real estate world as well, but not where you're at. But I definitely remember the first property I bought, and I can look back and how that's kind of evolved into what it is today.
Yeah.
And it's always pretty awesome to hear some of those stories.
Yeah. I mean, so in hindsight, I'm definitely a student of history. I happened to be taking a finance class in fall of 2008 for my MBA. One of the most interesting semesters to take a finance class.
Right.
The world was falling apart and understanding exactly. It was basically like a live version of The Big Short. You go to class and you're like, oh my God, how could they ever let this happen? In hindsight, got super lucky just as far as the Fed zero interest rate policy. I think I was, again, smart enough to be able to see that a bit and kind of ride the asset wave. So made a ton of sacrifices. I've moved, my wife and I moved into our I don't know if it's our forever home, but it's at least our long-term home about 1.5 years ago. And that was my, I think, 17th move in 20 years. And so I've always just been kind of playing Monopoly in real life and kind of trading up to the next thing. 2012, I kind of rented on the edge of a downtown area, urban downtown area in Charleston that was questionable at the time. And I reset the pricing in that neighborhood. So 2012, right? So not too far out of the bubble. And so close that I was the first person, like I literally reset the pricing in that building for those 14 residential condos. And so I would go out there at night. I'd run up there from my apartment a mile and a half away, and I'd kind of hang out. And I'm like, yeah, it's a little dicey, but I think I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And I happened to come across this 50-year study that was, we were about 15 years into it from the local college. And, the things that they said were planned and would happen had happened. And so I'm like, okay, might take another 35 years, but we should be okay here. And
Yeah.
man, when I closed, it wasn't even 6 months. Like the development just blew past that. There's a Starbucks across the street from that building now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's just crazy having watched this grown. Again, also fortunate enough to be in a city that's grown massively, especially since COVID, with moving here from other cities. And so I just, from there, sold that condo, bought a single family home a couple of blocks away. Started renting out a room, kind of doing the house hack thing, but using Airbnb to do it. 2017 moved out of that place and turned the whole thing into an Airbnb. And then I started focusing on kind of two different paths. One, investing my own money with properties that I owned, and then another of managing other people's properties.
Mm-hmm.
And so, kind of have two lines of business there now. But the owning has turned into two small boutique hotels. We've got 3 investors for those in Charleston. They're 9 keys each. One of the partners is a general contractor. So these old historic homes that would terrify me a couple years ago definitely don't anymore because we've got him. And so just finished the first one actually 11 days ago. If you're ever in Charleston, let me know. I'll put you up.
Yeah, definitely.
But we've kind of got this technology forward, design forward concept that is, interestingly enough, I don't think would have existed were it not for COVID.
Yeah.
Again, something good comes out of something bad. Worst hospitality recession in the history of mankind. Provides this new level of expectation, right? So we are actually shutting the second one down also in Charleston in about 8 weeks, and that one will reopen in October. So we'll launch the brand at the same time, and hopefully we're working on 3 other deals. We hopefully will have closed on one of those by then as well too. So all cities in the Southeast US. Just been kind of riding that wave, and then my management company have definitely built out the infrastructure on that. So we're probably one of the top 5 or 6 companies in terms of gross booking volume in Charleston as well. And some of that, again, growth of Charleston, so lucky there, right? In terms of location, and growth of short-term rentals and Airbnb, and also our mature regulatory environment. We operate in the Smokies as well, which is a little bit more Wild West. There's 14,000 rentals there as opposed to here where there's like 400, right? So it's a much more confined market where we operate. So, crazy path on both fronts, but I've been fortunate enough to take a 401k loan and multiply it many times. Not something your financial advisor would tell you to do, but
no,
but I'm a huge fan of betting on yourself.
Absolutely.
I'll never advise against that.
Yeah. Wow. Love it. What's to come? Do you have an end goal? Is there a vision for what you want to accomplish?
Totally. Yeah. I don't think I realized how much I stood in my way until the last 6 months. And I had this clarity of vision that I've never had before in my life. And probably some of that's probably my wife as well too. Whether she wants to admit it or not. I think, heading down this path, we'll scale the management company to a certain point. But the reality is that really manages our brand, our hotel brand, right? And so the real vision is owning 1,000 keys, and keys equals rooms or suites in the hospitality world. And so we're 18 keys now. And so the plan is to grow that to 1,000 in 10 years. I'm having a lot of fun as we do this. And I think we are, in my opinion, the boutique B&B space, that asset class has more upside potential than short-term rentals did 10 years ago. And so I was kind of lucky enough to, my joke is my old college buddies in 2012 would be like, "You're doing what?" And now 10 years later, everybody knows what Airbnb is.
Right.
And I
Right.
kind of have to explain what an actual B&B is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the 10-year plan. I'm pretty happy at this point. I don't, if that happens, great. In the meantime, I'm having a lot of fun. It's not work to me.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd love to buy a few other businesses. There's a couple things that really interest me, but big thing is, being 41, and my wife being 36 is hopefully being lucky enough to have our own kid.
Yeah.
And we'll head down that path, and hopefully I
Yeah.
can get her
Absolutely.
to work less. She's a
Yeah.
physician, so
Okay.
hopefully get her to work a little bit less.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, just kind of enjoying life, and really grateful to be where I'm at this point.
Yeah. Very good. Love it. What's maybe you could think of a moment, maybe you've already talked a little bit about a moment where, you had you decided chose different, you could be in a very different place in your life. Like you said, I think there's a lot of people, especially after the last 3 years or so, that have been in those moments, are in that moment right now, that could use some sage advice, if you will, of somebody that navigated those times and learned from that. You get a
And
moment.
it's I'll have to kind of defer to my moderately ghetto background.
Yeah.
I actually got arrested when I was 20 years old, and
Okay.
I got bored in college, and I got distracted doing dumb shit, and so I actually wound up taking a year off. So the irony is I actually skipped my junior year at college just because I tested out of so many things.
Oh, really?
So fortunate in that regard,
Yeah.
but wound up having to take a year off, so I graduated when everybody else did.
Okay.
And so when that happened, as I got out of jail, I had somebody like, oh yeah, just come home, and I'll we can have you deal these drugs, and we'll get you set up, right? And
Yeah.
certainly won't go into specifics, but it's one of those things where it was like, this is not going to work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had already contemplated my life
Yeah.
for the night that I spent in jail, and
Yeah.
so I went home. That happened. I put all of my stuff in a duffel bag. I bought a one-way bus ticket for $79 back to Charleston to face those charges and
Yeah.
rebuild my life. And I ran away from that for the rest of my life.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. Was that an easy choice to make at that point?
It really was. It's, we all have those like 10 moments in
Yeah. Right.
life where you really kind of look back on, you're like, wow, that was my fork. That was my
Yeah.
crossroads. And
Yeah.
for me, like I didn't sleep that single night I was in jail then,
Yeah.
and I'm like, how the hell did I get here? Like I skipped a
Yeah.
year of college, like I'm doing things, and it was like, man, I must have taken a wrong turn at that last fork in the road. So
Yeah.
when the next one came in a few days, it was I had already given myself the pep talk to get the hell out of that mindset. So
Yeah.
it's unfortunately people that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's easier for us to fall into those traps. We don't necessarily have the best guidance, and we have to kind of figure it out for ourselves. So probably prone to making more mistakes than we otherwise would have. I certainly am no stranger to that, not perfect by any means. But that was probably, in hindsight, like the single biggest, you can do this and die in 5 or 10 years if you're lucky, or be in prison, or you can do this and try to make something of yourself and fight against what you've already built on the other side. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a
Definitely.
pretty big moment.
Yeah. What as we wrap up, what if there's one or two things you could give the listener to help them, if they would apply it today, would move their life forward today, what would that be?
Yeah, I read constantly, so
Yeah.
I think that's huge, especially for entrepreneurs. With your audience, I think I read this book toward the end of last year called "Profit First" by Mike Michalowicz.
Yeah.
So I kind of leave your folks with that. It's if you think of it in terms of, say, like tithing or contributing to your 401k, it's automatic, right? So you take whatever that percentage is and you put it into a separate account that's specifically for profit. And so when you have that revenue come in, it automatically goes to that. And I think all too often, so many businesses fail within the first 5 years. It's tragic, but it's not. If it were easy, everybody would do it. And so the whole concept is, so many people, even if they're making payroll, they're paying the bills, after 10 years, other than paying themselves some nominal salary and really giving themselves another job that wasn't working for someone else, they don't have anything to show for it. And this is kind of the beginning of that, set something up that looks a little different, set up a different account for taxes, operating expenses, profit, and actually have something to show for it, and pay yourself a small bonus every quarter, because you're the one that's taking the risk as the entrepreneur. So I probably read 35 books last year. That was definitely my favorite one.
Yeah.
And we
Very cool.
implemented it and definitely have kind of shifted our cash position massively in the last 6 months. So
Love it.
would highly recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a main place that we could send people for you as far as checking you out and what you're up to, following what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty easy. So, and I'm hopefully this podcast was a little bit of an indicator that I'm pretty open.
Yeah.
I think I hope that people can find some strength in some of the things that I've had to go through, and so I'm brutally honest and transparent. And I'm also super easy to get a hold of. So my website is just joshhatter.com. It's joshhatter.com. And I actually have a Calendly link on there. So if people want to follow up and have a conversation, it could be about anything. It could be about short-term rentals. It could be about boutique hotels. It can be about, hey, I went through some really fucked up stuff and I want to talk about it. Like I'm there. I've had it as well too, and I just want to be that for somebody else.
Yeah, I love that. We'll get that linked up too as well. That's cool that you do that. I appreciate it. I could go on for a little bit more here, definitely, but I know you're busy and I got to go get my kids from school, so I better not. But
Thank you.
thanks for the time, man. This has been great. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stay right here if you've enjoyed this conversation for more. We got incredible guests coming up right after this, but thanks again, Joshua. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.